Now, as we move on from our budget that we've completed, we're going to focus on variances. So what happens when our budget doesn't match what actually happens in business, which, believe it or not, is pretty common. So with that being said, what I want us to think about here is the idea that as we created this budget, we had some inputs and we had some expected units and we had the expected selling price. Those are considered standards. So we use standards in our budget. When we looked at the direct materials budget, for example, we also had some standards. For plastic parts, we said the standard pounds per unit used was 400, and the standard cost per pound was $2 per pound. So as we move towards evaluating variances, I want you to keep in mind that the budget is really developed based on these standard cost or these standards that we are using in developing the budget. So I want to point your attention to this tab here, the Chapter 24 Standard Cost Change Info tab, and then a Chapter 24 Standard Cost tab. Now, when you open this cost tab, you might look at this and be a little bit overwhelmed, okay? But let me reassure you, I want to walk you through this. It's really more of one, understanding how Excel can benefit us from a business tool that we can use in our business to prepare reports and compile information. But it's also going to help us to see when we compare what happened from the budget to the actual. I've got another area over here that's going to do some automatic calculating for us, and we're going to use that to understand the actual to budget difference. So first of all, just to keep in mind where the budget came from. That is all this information highlighted here, okay? And this maybe what you see as a yellow or beige color, okay? So our standard, just to walk you through how this works, question one is, how is the budgeted production cost derived, okay? Well, it was derived because we said plastic parts took 400 units. Well, if you come down here, now we're going to see what standards made that up, okay? So of the of the 400 pounds per unit, which can be found here, notice that this is a sum, and it's a sum of these two items. So in order to make our boats, we required 375 pounds of actual plastic to go into the final boat. But we allowed for waste of 25 pounds. And if you think about it, as we're molding the boat, conforming the plastic to what we need, we're probably going to lose some of that material. And so that's where our 400 pounds came from. Now, as far as the cost of $2 a pound, which we see here, and also up here, notice that this $2 a pound is actually made up of 3 different price components. And remember, these are all considered standard, the unit amounts. So just the purchase price for plastic was $1.50 a pound. But then we also had some charges for freight and receiving and handling. Now, every one of these is set up the same way, and that's where our budget was derived from. So what I want to do now is I want to show you, well, what happens when we go to compare the actual? So over here in green, what if the actual costs change during the year? And that just means, what if they don't equal budget? And that's going to happen, okay? Our costs may rise, our costs may fall, but that's going to happen. And then question 3, what happens if the actual usage per unit changes? So what if it doesn't actually take 400 pounds? What if it takes something different? And so I want to show you how we can analyze that. So if you go back to the standard cost tab, this tells us again that we're manufacturing the boats. Management now wants to see if we've done a good budget, what has changed, okay? Remember, if everything went exactly like budget, the company would have earned net income just over $160,000. But again, how likely is that to happen? I don't have an exact percentage for you, but I will tell you that being on budget exactly every time probably happens less than 1% of the time. We're always going to have some variances. So let's talk about what happened. So overall, the company was able to experience several efficiencies. You'll see where that comes out here in just a minute. They also experienced some cost, and so we're going to use this to update that green section we were just looking at. So in this first video, I'm going to focus on plastic parts, and I really want you to understand how this works, and that will make the rest of this go by a little bit quicker. So first of all, The company was able to reduce their waste by 20 pounds. That's fantastic because that's going to save us money. However, the purchase price went up, and that's going to cost us additional money. That also caused an increase in freight and receiving and handling. So let's go over and update this. Let's first focus on reducing waste by 20 pounds. So what I want to do down here is I want to start with my required materials. Now, notice that it didn't change, okay? So we still used 375 pounds in production. But what did change is our allowance for waste. Remember, we were able to save 20 pounds. So I'm going to just use Excel and I'm going to update this. So I'm going to start with my 25 and I'm going to reduce that by the 20 I was able to save. So now if you'll notice, I'm no longer at 400 pounds per unit, I'm at 380. And so what I want to do is I want to come up here and I want to create this summary. So I'm going to click equals and I'm going to bring my pounds per unit up to my summary section of my actual cost. And you'll see why that's important here in just a minute. Now, what happened next? Let's go back and look at this. So I'm done with that one. I'm just going to exit off of there. Okay. Now, purchase price net of discounts increased by 50 cents a pound. So over here in my cost per pound, I want to start with my $1.50 because I said my costs increased by 50 cents. So I'm going to add 50 cents to that and I have $2 per pound. Now remember, what else happened? That caused us to have an increase of 25 cents for both freight as well as receiving and handling. So my freight was 25 cents. I'm adding 25 cents to that. And my receiving and handling also increased by 25 cents. So overall, I went from $2 over here to $3 is what I actually experienced. So my standard for both pounds per unit used and my cost per pound have changed. So again, I want to put this here and I want to put in my $3. Now notice this automatically calculated for me, which is terrific because that's a bonus of Excel. I've set that up for you, okay? Now let's just look at really quickly before we finish this in the future video. I want to show you what is happening here. So as we look at this, I want you to compare cost per unit actual to cost per unit budget or standard, okay? Now, notice that this difference of this total, this new amount of $1,140 and the difference between the 800 is not only due to plastic parts, and it's not only due to cost. So for this total, which now if you move over here, I've automatically populated this for you. Don't pay attention to any of these right now. They're not updated yet. Let's pay attention to these. So overall, my cost per unit is shown as a negative. That's because my variance between actual and budget is unfavorable. That means overall, my costs went up $340. And in budget variances, we always show unfavorable amounts as negatives. So overall, my cost in total, my materials variance is $340 and it's unfavorable. Why? Because the total increased from $800 to $1,140. Now, in order to make better business decisions, I need to know, was it because of my cost or was it because of my usage of pounds per unit? Well, it's made up of both, right? So now if you look at this, my cost per pound increased by $1. So again, that's a negative or unfavorable variance. And that's an unfavorable price variance because my cost changed. However, let's look at pounds per unit. Remember, we saved pounds, so it's positive. That's a favorable variance, which is outstanding. So what we can say about this variance is that our total cost per unit is unfavorable. So my total direct materials variance is unfavorable, and it's made up of an unfavorable price variance and a favorable quantity variance. And I can see that demonstrated here. So that's what you're going to be working on calculating in some of the examples in the PLAs and in the homework. And so make sure that you're paying attention to exactly how these comparisons are being made. We're always looking at actual compared to standard. But we also need to take into consideration that that total, in this case, direct materials variance, is made up of both components, and those components are broken out into a materials price variance as well as a materials quantity variance. And with that, we're going to stop and take a minute, and I'm going to, in the next videos, show you the remaining changes. But focusing in on how this variance works is really key to understanding budget versus actual.